Joining me now on another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show, with New York headed to the nation's capital on Friday to take on the Wizards. It's time to preview this matchup with Matt Modderno of the Bleav In Wizards podcast. And we're going to see how much he believes in this basketball team in just a second. Matt, welcome to the Knicks Film School podcast. How you doing?
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm actually excited about this matchup. I feel like these teams usually play pretty fun games, and that's been a rarity for the Wizards this year, as I'm sure we'll get into. So take what we can get.
Well, let's start there. So to the uneducated Knicks fan that only sees the standings, only sees 8 losses in 9 games, and only sees, where the net rating is, where the offensive rating is, I think specifically what the Knicks fan will look to is that the Wizards are last in offensive rebound percentage, and the Knicks are that's how they score their points, right? Is they're just going to get 4 and 5 shots at the rim.
Yep.
But also the Knicks fan has some PTSD of teams that probably shouldn't create games that shouldn't create close games, creating close games. So how have the Wizards played is not the word I want to ask. It's more like, how have they lost their games this year? But what can a Knicks fan expect going into this matchup?
The way this game will play out, and you can quote me on this one and we can check in after the fact, is it'll be relatively close for the first half. The Knicks will go up about 6 at halftime. And then at some point, for the most, I'd say the first half of their game so far, the Wizards would have given up like a 20-5 run early in the third quarter. They've actually progressed a little bit. Now they've been saving that for the fourth quarter. But at some point, the Knicks will blow this one wide open. The Wizards will take out all of their starters and put in a scrappy bench second unit that the Knicks will feel in no way threatened by. And they'll close it to like 10 or 11. And ultimately the Knicks will close it out and win by like 13 or 14. And it'll look a lot closer on paper than it probably should actually have looked. That's been mostly sort of the blueprint for their game so far this season.
So what you're telling me is that the Knicks fan should expect not so the 2 games they played this year that I guess you could call blowouts were the Hornets and the Spurs. Yep. And we knew very early on these games were over.
They were over. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Wizards will put up a bit more of a fight is what you project.
I think it'll be like one of those probably never in doubt sort of games, but they'll make it just uncomfortable enough at the end that maybe the starters have to come back in just to finish this thing off. That's kind of been a typical move. Like the Heat had to do that. You've had the Mavericks had to do that a little bit. We're just okay, all right, we'll put Luka back in here. He'll put the final nail in the coffin, and then we'll kind of we'll cruise to victory from there.
That might inform our gambling segment, betting and sweating, because it's terrifying to take any of the Knicks starters when they play one of the lower teams.
Sure.
Because we don't know how long these guys are going to be in the game. Even with a Tom Thibodeau team, the Knicks will be on a back-to-back because they play Charlotte at 6 p.m. less than 24 hours later the next day.
Tough.
So you're curious if the Knicks are able to control this one. The vibes in Washington, you project them from the conversation so far that they're not as dire as 2-9 would seem, but I know that you trade Bradley Beal, you trade Porzingis, you invest in the Jordan Poole of it all, and you go into this season with what kind of expectations? Is this how you thought the season would play out to this point?
Let me clarify if I've given the wrong impression here. The Wizards are actually somehow worse than their 2-9 record.
Worse, okay.
they're just good enough at making the scores look better from afar. So if you're scrolling through their results, you're like, okay, they only lost by 13 to this team. Oh, they were close with the Raptors. The Raptors game being the lone exception where they were up big and then didn't score in the final 6 minutes of the game and ended up losing. Oh, the Nets, they only lost by 8 while they were down 25 in that game also. They just find a way in either the third or now seems like the fourth quarter to totally let this game slip away, get blown out, and then they make it competitive enough so that on paper you think, well, they're scrappy and they're plucky, when realistically none of these teams are actually ever really threatened that much about losing the game. It's just enough to maybe make them sweat. You're there. It's tough. Jordan Poole's been really bad, and I think there's some. I don't know. There's maybe some tension coming up because of that. You see some players kind of eye roll a little bit. There was a clip going around of Poole not paying attention in the huddle the other day and not knowing the play after the fact. So there's just little stuff like that. You don't want to read too much into a couple of videos here or there, but it seems to reflect what's going on the court. You've got a starting backcourt of Jordan Poole, who guards no one, and Tyus Jones, who's essentially too little to guard anyone, or at least isn't putting in the effort to do it. They basically soft switch everything. So it's a lot of just like, okay, we'll end up with total mismatches without fighting through it. They're awful defensively. So this should be, if I were a betting person, I would probably take the over. If anybody listening to this is wondering how they should kind of play this game out.
So take the over and take the spread, you're thinking?
Probably a reasonable choice, yeah.
Okay. Well, again, the expectations going into this year, did you think it would be this bad?
No, I would have taken the over personally. I thought there were enough people. The over was 24 and a half, or the number was 24 and a half most places. And I thought they'd be like a high 20s win team. I think they might actually still get to that point. Their young guys have been really, like, those have been the people that have been scrappy and plucky. It's the starters that have been kind of giving up these colossal leads. If you look at net rating for their backcourt, they're abysmal. Probably the worst starting backcourt in the league from that perspective. So I thought they'd be better. I thought we'd get closer to the Jordan Poole we saw 2 years ago and not the one we saw most of last year. I thought Tyus Jones, the Grizzlies have been really good whenever Ja was out and Tyus started. So together, that formula just hasn't worked out particularly well. And because of it, I think they've been actually worse than I would have thought. Denny Avdija has been better. Kuzma's been pretty solid this year. Gafford is, I don't know, he tries real hard. So, they've just kind of underwhelmed me personally. It wouldn't surprise me, though, if this is one of those teams where they clear out some of the vets that clearly don't want to be there anymore. And in the second half of the year, they beat up on people down the stretch and win a couple games, like a 7-2 finish to the season or something that nobody expects. And they still hit that over number. But this is not going to look like a team that's competitive for the play-in at any point this season.
So, two things. First of all, you mentioned the starting backcourt and the net rating. I have Cleaning the Glass up in front of me, and I pulled up the lineup data. Yeah. If people on YouTube might have seen me give a wide-eyed look. I'm like, is that a real number?
It's rough. Yeah.
So correct me if I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly, because there are moments where I wonder if I'm using the site right.
Sure.
So in lineups that feature Tyus Jones and Jordan Poole together, which is 200. There's 552 possessions that qualify. Yeah. And the Wizards are minus 22.5, the first percentile in the NBA.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. They're giving up they're scoring 105 points per 100 possessions, which would be one of the worst offensive ratings in the NBA. And they're giving up 127.6 points per 100, which would be the worst in NBA history. I'm not trying to pile on.
You're
I feel bad reading it, to be honest.
Yeah. I feel bad watching it. If at any point as a Knicks fan you spend this year going like, maybe I'm falling out of love with Brunson a little bit, or how does he and Quickly look together in these matchups? It's like, well, it could always be worse. And we found the pair apparently that it could not actually be any worse then. So
literally, it could not be any worse. You mentioned veterans that don't want to be here anymore. Who falls under that category?
Yeah, that's sort of the question, and it's hard to tell like exactly who it is, but the vibes seem off with some of the older guys. That they just the defensive effort isn't there. Poole might be one of those guys. To be honest with you, I don't know. It just the shot selection is weird. You've got older guys like Gallinari and people coming in that they're fine when they play, but he's like glacially slow at this point. So it's just not Knicks Danilo Gallinari anymore, where there was like a lot of like fun, intriguing stuff he could do. He's shooting okay-ish. DeLon Wright is hurt, so we won't even see him. He had been fine, but I picture like DeLon Wright of last year, where he was this like really good off-ball free safety type. You didn't want to throw, anywhere near him in the passing lanes. And he moved the ball around and was a good like table setter for people. This year, he was like calling his own number a lot. That was kind of weird. I don't know if he was auditioning for a trade from some other team. I liked the couple minutes early on that they had, first couple of minutes they'd given to Landry Shamet. He can't seem to hit anything now anymore. He's saying the right things, but if I'm a guy like that, like, why do I want to be like the 8th or 9th man in Washington when I could go be the 8th or 9th man on literally any other team in the league? So it's hard to pinpoint exactly who the problematic guys are, but there's clearly something here where this group is not gelling. Like I mentioned, the younger guys, when they come in, it's the Eugene Amaruiz, it's the Ryan Rollins, it's our rookie Bilal Coulibaly has been really good. He's shooting the ball well. He's a nightmare for people defensively. Like that's when we seem to go on our run. Is we were calling it like the throw in the flag or throw in the towel lineup for a while, but then they would go on like a 15-2 run, and you're like, oh, okay, like maybe we got something here, and then we'd take them back out, put our starters in, and lose the game.
So again, to your point, the lineups when you sort Unclean the Glass to take Jordan Poole and Tyus Jones off.
Yep.
I mean, 307 possessions is a sample size, and it's a plus 19. So that speaks to what you're talking about. And it's Landry Shamet, it's Coulibaly, it's Corey Kispert, it's Denny Avdia, and it's obviously Gallo as part of the successful lineups. Kuzma seems to fall in the middle here. And I guess but the question I have towards Kuzma is, do you foresee him being part of the solution here in Washington, or in this specific season, is it more, again, small sample size? Is it early return showing that he's more one of the vets that may have to get moved in the future?
I would say of their 11 games, there were 7 of them where, at least for the first half of these games, he was like almost exclusively their offense. It's like a 35% usage rate for him for a lot of these games, but also they needed it. Like he was the guy getting downhill, driving a kick to people, like drawing the defense in, being unselfish, trying to get to the rim. They've been really good scoring around the basket for the most part. The shooting is like kind of fine. Like he's like 35% from 3 so far. It's not probably as good as you would want it to be, but he does end up with a couple grenades here and there that maybe throw the percentage off. But the defense has been considerably worse this year. I actually felt like he was an extremely underrated defender last year. It's just not a thing he gets a lot of credit for, but he was the guy taking a lot of those tougher matchups. I think Denny Avdia has been really good defensively the last couple of years. He's much better offensively this year. But when they played certain teams, when they played Philly last year, Kuzma was the guy drawing the hardened matchup most of the time. He guarded Dame Lillard a lot of the time when they played Portland last season. So like he took tough matchups. This year, I don't know if it's the offensive workload is so high that the defense is sort of like falling by the wayside because of it, but he looks worse defensively. They need the defensive rebounding he provides. I think that's one area where he's definitely helped out. So long-winded way of saying, like, I think he's been more good than bad, but he's not probably been as good as you would need like a number one option on a team to be competitive a lot of the time. But if I'm a playoff team, like, I don't know, Milwaukee or somebody like that, and I need a little extra punch, this is a guy I'm strongly considering trading for, because I think in that context, he's going to be so much better because he's super versatile. I think you could fit him in with any lineup realistically in the league. Like he makes sense for a lot of different groups. So it's nice that he kind of is like a good off-court mentor for some of these young guys. You don't have to rush to trade him, but I would imagine he's probably not here super long term. The contract is like incredibly friendly. It actually decreases over time. So maybe you wait a year or two and you shop him at peak value, or I don't know, if you get like a Godfather offer right now, you just pull the cord and get it done. So you can kind of go either way realistically.
It looks like there's a bit of a clean slate in Washington. I don't know if I'm reading that correctly, but after the Bradley Beal trade, really the Porzingis and Bradley Beal trade have to be counted together. And while let me just ask you, when Bradley Beal got traded, what were your thoughts? Was it like an unfortunate departure of one of the franchise's favorites, or was it like a Band-Aid finally getting ripped off?
Euphoria, I think.
Euphoria. So it was even more so. Okay.
And not even a disrespect to Beal thing. He's obviously a really good player. It was just going down a road where you would run a max out, best case scenario, you win 35 games. It's just not something I think most fans here wanted to do anymore. And that was kind of what they'd committed themselves to, with a lot of money, to guys that weren't really like needle movers in terms of big time success. Like Brad is great. He's not going to single-handedly make a team a playoff team. And Porzingis was great, but he's not going to do the same thing either. Two of them together couldn't even do that. And, people say, well, they only played 60 games or whatever. Like, they shut them both down with like 10 or 12 games left in the year for the most part. So they were actually pretty healthy for a lot of the season and still didn't get very far. So I think everybody here was just kind of ready for a rebuild that was probably 2 or 3 years overdue. And to your point, like, they're trying to clean the books as much as they can. The Poole contract is, it probably would be tough to trade right now.
At this point, yeah.
So, but still, you got to reach the salary floor somehow, and it's not an insane contract. So maybe in 2 more years, if he looks a little better and the salary is a little more palatable for somebody with 2 years left on it, and then maybe you can move him at that point. So I think that's going to be what they're going to look to do.
Well, it's funny. I forget who brought up this example, but like as a Knicks fan in 2018-19, Porzingis had torn his ACL the year before. So they went into that year with Tim Hardaway Jr. getting a ton of usage and like Emmanuel Mudiay getting a ton of usage. And that whole season was like, we knew from very early on, this team is destined for less than 20 wins.
Right.
And it took all the weight off of expectations. And you had some tanking weapons on the court for a lot of the year. And I wonder if that's the role, which probably comes off as disrespectful to Jordan Poole. But I mean, the Warriors used him as a 6th man, not a high usage
number one scorer.
Yeah. Exactly. Not the primary option on this team. Is that how you... Disappointment's a weird word to use. What does a disappointing Wizards season look like? Like, do you measure it in where they fall in the draft lottery? Do you measure it in progress of any guys on the team? Do wins come into the equation at all?
I think before the season, I would have said a disappointing season is like 30, somewhere between 28 and 32 wins, because you made yourself too good just to be out of those bottom couple spots. I don't think there's probably realistically any chance of them pulling that off at this point. So to me, a disappointing season is not getting like Koulibaly and guys like that enough reps to really grow and develop their game, not seeing what Johnny Davis can do. It's an embarrassing, move from a coaching staff or a front office to have a guy who had an abysmal rookie year that's looked a little better when he's actually played so far this year. The shot looks atrocious, but it's gone in a decent amount. He's been very good defensively, and you're getting blown out and nobody's putting up any defensive resistance, but you still won't play a guy in the second year of his deal. Like, things like that make no sense to me. I think they make no sense to a lot of people. Like Koulibaly having a 7% usage on a team that's not winning anything is nuts. Give him 15, 20, see where we're at. Give Ryan Rollins 10, 15 minutes every game, guaranteed. Like, I don't need to see Landry Shamet play anymore. I know what Landry Shamet is. Everyone in the league knows what he is. You're not increasing his trade value. You're not winning with those guys. I'm not putting it all on Landry Shamet. That's just one example. But like, you shouldn't be playing your, these vets at the expense of your young guys at this point. Now, if you do it for the first couple of weeks of the season, no big deal. If we have a follow-on conversation sometime in February and they're still doing it, that would be a pretty disastrous way for the season to play on, in my opinion. So
2 years ago, when the Knicks, a Tom Thibodeau team is never gonna defeat, like,
right, and don't throw in the towel there. Yeah.
Like, you can't. So, little backstory. They had Alec Burks on the team at the time, and they also had Kemba Walker. Kemba Walker was their sneaky offseason signing. The Thunder bought him out. Knicks get Kemba, and 20 games in, it's like, oh, he's washed. And
this is not going to work anymore.
This is not like a thing. And so Tibbs makes a switch and puts Kemba like out of the rotation completely and puts Alec Burks in the starting 5. Suddenly, offensive rating is going up. They're winning games. Defensive rating is going up. Omicron happens, and they're down to like 4 guys. And he's like, all right, I'll go back to Kemba. Kemba has his 3 best games of the season. He scores like 30 against the Celtics, 40 against. I remember it was the Wizards at the Garden. And then the next day was Christmas. He had a triple-double. And then he went back into the crapper for the next couple, like 6 weeks. And it was like of no fault of his own. Father Time is undefeated. But like, Tibbs never went back to what was actually working. And as the season progressed, it was like, okay, then he eventually, after the All-Star break, went back to the Alec Burks starting 5. But by then we were like, hey, give Quickly the keys for 2 months. Let's see what happens. Let's see what Obi Toppin looks like for 2 months. And it became this very venomous reaction every time you watch a Knick game that I only care when Obi's in the game, when Quickly's in the game with RJ Barrett and Mitchell Robinson. If you're over the age of 25, get out of here forever. this leads to a question about how the fans are reacting and who they're blaming for the frustrations of not seeing the young guys. Is it at the head coach? Is it at the front 100%. Office? So it's a head. They're out for blood for the head coach.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some very, even for like NBA Twitter standards, pretty negative commentary about Wes Unseld Jr. so far, and where people would like to see him go beyond this year. So it's just not a good look. Like it's one thing if you're like, hey, I'm a coach, I'm an old school guy, I've been around the league a long time, and I'm never gonna like openly tank. I can't put the young guys in there because my vets are playing hard and playing well. But when your young guys are actually the ones that the eye test and all metrics say are your more productive players, and you're still not playing them, that's what people can't kind of accept. Like I said early after the first couple of games, like people were like, I don't understand why Coulibaly's not starting and playing like, TMAC level usage. Like, okay, well, maybe he has to do something that he's not doing to earn those minutes. You don't want to gift a young player there. That needs to be accountability. But if a young guy comes in and defends really well, and then you've got your whole starting backcourt getting torched, and the team makes a run with you, the young guy in the game, but then you don't play, like it's just really hard to rationalize what he's actually seeing that's leading them away from these things. And again, maybe it changes at the trade deadline or something like that. Kudos to Knicks fans for waiting that long into the season to get that point. Wizards fans are literally all over. I do not care if Coulibaly's not in the game right now, basically.
I think they hovered around 500 enough for that season that there's this it was literally a 3-17 stretch in February into March that the Fire Tibbs posters were out, and that was a dark time in Knicks history. Then Jalen Brunson showed up, but
there you go.
I'm fascinated by the temperature of the Wizards fan base, because on one hand, we just did a depressed fan base rankings on our Patreon.
Sure.
And like the Wizards end up on there just from our outside looking in perspective. Yeah, but I put them like toward the 10 of the top 10, like closer to the bottom, because of the clean slate that I at least judge it by. And it sounds like while there is frustration about the kids that aren't playing, there's not as much of a commitment long term to the vets that are quote unquote vets, the Jordan Pooles, the Kuzmas, the Tyus Joneses, that you're headed for the lottery, and this is a season that it's more of a vegetables season. And it doesn't sound defeated. Is that a fair characterization? It doesn't sound like this is going to be a time. This is going to be a season that like you look back and it's like, oh, that was a wasted season.
It's getting dark pretty quick here. Like we're going to organically lose enough games that at the end, I think everybody will convince themselves it was fine because we got a top 3 pick and Coulibaly played enough that it mattered. If you trade any of these bets and get anything for them, if Tyus Jones turns into a top 20 protected first round pick, if you get 2 firsts for Kuzma, if I don't know, you could trade Gallo for a top 58 protected second round pick. Like I don't know, if you get anything for some of these guys and you can build a couple assets. I think that's one of the troubling things is a lot of times when teams tear it down, they trade off their better players and they get something for them. You essentially traded Porzingis away and realistically all you were doing was enabling him to sign where he wanted to sign, and you get Tyus Jones back for doing that. You don't really get much back for Bradley Beal. So it's not like you stocked your war chest, with all these moves. You're kind of like a cupboard is kind of bare situation here. So I think that hurts a little bit. So if they can lose enough games to get a good pick, these vets play well enough to turn them into something, and the young guys show something, I think most Wizards fans would leave this year being like, all right, cool. Like lock and load next year and like, we'll see where we're at. But I don't know if you win enough games that you end up with a 6th pick or something, and you've played the vets and the young guys don't get any better, and you go into next year and you still don't really have with one of these young guys and you've kept all the older guys, I think that would be kind of a tougher pill to swallow for most of us.
Well, I'll say this on behalf of Knicks fans going into this game, the last preseason game that the Knicks played was against the Wizards.
Yep.
and Jordan Poole went off. I think he had 40 points in 3 quarters.
The last time he played well. So,
well, unfortunately for us, it's our last impression of the Wizards. Yeah, and there was a lot of Knicks fans on our post game that night that were sounding the alarms. Oh my goodness, this team looks so bad going into the season. Bottom 10, bottom 5 defense. Here we come. And they're 6th in defense so far. And like you said, Jordan Poole has not, that might be his best game of the season. But going into this matchup, that's our last impression of the Wizards.
He can do it. He can go nuclear on anybody. It looked a little bit a couple games ago like he was trending back up, and they're all starting to blur together like which ones were which. But I want to say maybe like the Brooklyn game is like, oh, okay, kind of 23-ish points on efficient shooting. Like, cool. All right. Like maybe we got like the Jordan Poole we expected. He just needed to settle in. And then like last night it was absolutely atrocious again. So it's like, all right, we were just trying to like talk ourselves into anything at this point. But you're right. Like he could drop a 40-point game kind of out of nowhere. And you guys are as snake bitten a franchise for the last 20 years as we are. So if it was going to happen to anybody, it would be you all. So I hope for your sake it's not the case.
It's why we're not, well, okay, maybe half the fan base is going in with not as much confidence as a team like where the Knicks are should be going into this matchup. I want to go evergreen for the next question. I have 2 more before we get out of here. I've been doing this thing with my guests where I ask them about their perspective on rivals, and it's called the Mount Rushmore of rivals. And you know, for the Knicks fans, we have these dates we circle on the schedule, and you know, the moment it gets released, it's like, I can't wait till we play X. And the Wizards do not show up on the Knicks Mount Rushmore, and I don't think the Knicks show up on the Wizards Mount Rushmore. So tell me, who are the 4 teams that you, I guess, and Wizards fans look forward to playing throughout the season? Who are the rivals that you point to?
I realize that anyone listening to this who isn't familiar with our podcast or anything is like, God, this guy is the biggest Debbie Downer of all time. But like, we've been so irrelevant for like the last 20 years. There's not like a ton in the way of rivalries. There was 3 straight years where the Cavaliers knocked us out of the playoffs during the Gilbert Arenas years. That was kind of a circle the calendar kind of date for a while. There's been some back and forth with the Raptors. I think that's probably one where like, you know, there's been a little bit of like animosity back and forth. And the Celtics is probably one I would put on there. We had the whole 2017 playoffs and we showed up wearing all black and then got our asses kicked and stuff like that. So that's probably a good one. I feel like every fan base should hate Heat fans. And, you know, I'm sure that's probably on your Knicks list. I would think
it's on the list. Yeah. And Matt, not only is it on the list, it's come up on every single pregame Eastern Conference pod.
It says a lot about you if you're listening to this, Heat fans. Like, chill out, especially online.
My goodness, yes. Like the Hawks hate them. The obviously the Wizards hate them. The Hornets hate them. The Celtics hate them.
And it's
obviously
not even the team, by the way. It's it's a little bit the team.
It might be the team, but the fan bases are even worse. Yes.
When you lose a game, like because Porzingis can't post up like Drew Smith or somebody or Jamal Cain, or like it's just so infuriating. And then to listen to like literally every single trade that's been suggested the last 5 years is which good players on the Wizards can we send to the Miami Heat? Like I just can't personally deal with that shit anymore. So they're my least favorite personally.
Do you get a lot of that with the Knicks too? I know that
not as much, to be honest.
The Knicks have been in the market for a star since Leon Rose showed up. Yeah. I know there was because Bradley Beal and RJ Barrett have the same agent. Yeah. There was that connection made, but I haven't heard many.
No, we never really heard that.
Could be trade partners, you know?
Honestly, at least I know a decent amount of Knicks fans personally. So it's like, I feel bad because you guys have also been like mostly a beat up franchise. So it's like, there's not much animosity there. It's like, I hope, you know, both of our franchises can like not suck moving forward. And you guys are doing much better at that than we are the last couple of years here. So yeah, you know, it's hard to hate on, I guess.
But we've gotten to the not suck portion of the
can you take the next jump? That's the
now question. I think we're at the point of good now. I don't know if it's a trade or just an internal growth in some guys getting better, which this season seems to be off to that kind of start. That's how you get to elite. And then, you know, contender is a different category.
You a question about that real quick?
That's actually the last question I have is I hand it over to the guest to see if you have any questions about the Knicks.
can RJ Barrett shoot now? Is that a real thing? Do we buy this?
Matt, so here's the deal. There's two different camps.
Okay.
There's a lot of, and I think I followed quite literally in the middle of these two camps.
Okay.
There's a camp that wanted to launch RJ into the sun, trade him for any available, like Paul George, Zach LaVine, Donovan Mitchell, OG Anunoby. Like, he's never going to be efficient. This is not a thing. The 40% shooting when open gyms, when there was nobody in the arenas during the COVID year, is never coming back. Last year, it wasn't just an offensive regression. It was a defensive regression. And then the playoffs happened. And he had his best 8-game stretch of his career in the playoffs. And then FIBA, whatever you want to count that as. And it was enough to be like, all right, let's just see what this happens. Year 5, let's see what. And he showed up and he's like,
he's looked really good.
He's like Donovan Mitchell, like from 3. He's shooting 50% from 3 so far.
It's pretty good.
So I don't think he's going to do that all season, but the progress he's shown in process has been enough that I think even the staunchest RJ doubter is like, okay, I'm going to put Trade Machine away for a while. I want to see what this looks
optimistic
like.
At the very least.
Yeah, it's like, okay, let me just see what this becomes.
Sure.
The other camp is the pro RJ crowd that's like, this was always going to happen. I knew it. Yeah. You're stupid and you don't get to come to our party. I fall in the middle where I got to the point where I was wondering if the efficiency was ever going to show up, and the process was just so bad for a while. He did live at the rim, which was great, but he didn't finish at the rim. And I thought you would need to, like this season, you would need to have some type of respectable jump shot for you to be a wing in this league.
Yeah.
And the jump shot is respectable at this point. So I'm to the point where I was never venomous of like launch him into the sun.
Sure.
I was never in his corner of like, hey, he's actually not that bad. So the start he's off to is very, very encouraging, and we're just enjoying it as best as we can from our own perspective as in on Islands.
Yeah, I've been wondering about that from afar, because I think I had been on the like, if he doesn't shoot, what is he camp? Like, that's sort of the Denny Avdia experience with Wizards fans too. Like, you're either very pro or very against. I apparently I'm a hater to his fan group, but I like to think I'm in the middle. Very good defensive player, can do a lot offensively, but if he can't shoot, he can't unlock enough of those things to be consistently productive. This year, he's shooting a lot better and magically, unlocks a lot more of those things. So it goes a long way. Yeah,
there is a hint of, like, RJ did come into this league at 19, and I think even the most critical of him recognized like the circumstances. Like his first year, the Knicks, that was the year that Porzingis got traded during the season. They were supposed to get Durant, Kyrie, and Zion, and they get RJ, and then like every power forward that was available. Taj Gibson, Bobby Portis, Julius Randle, obviously Marcus Morris, and RJ just had the worst spacing possible for a guy that needs to live at the rim. Right. Year 2, they just simplified his game, and then they gave him these pistol sets that got him going downhill. He still had some issues. Well, he still had some issues finishing at the rim, but he became this corner 3-point shooter that was elite. Like it just lived off, like his 3-point volume lived off that. Year 3, Julius had his issues, and so they gave RJ a 30 usage for half the season. And I think they were trying to get his trade value up because they were going to go try and get Donovan Mitchell. Right. And then the Donovan Mitchell summer happens. RJ gets extended instead of traded, and then has his worst season as a pro that year. And this year, it's the first time he's coming into a season with some continuity. Sure. And I think it's done him wonders. I think it's done everybody wonders. Yeah. This team just, like, the only change that was made to the rotation is Obi Toppin for Dante DiVincenzo, and early returns are they have their bench unit with RJ has a +7 in its possessions this year. So
yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for that. I'm a firm believer in like, hey, just give these guys enough time to work it out and kind of clean up the pieces around them to make them all successful. And it seems like they've done a pretty good job of that so far.
To that point, we can wrap up here. What's been cool to see is it's like also giving them a chance to try new things. Like like even Tibbs, like the dinosaur, like there's so much more ball movement now. And he knows all of these players so well that he knows like, okay, I can experiment with this thing. I know like the Grimes is really good from this corner three. So I'm going to call plays to make sure this three gets to this specific shot gets taken. I'm going to experiment with these guys together because I know that these like putting Emmanuel Quickly and Jalen Brunson together. I know that they can play with each other because I've seen it for so long. Yeah, it's led to this familiarity with how all of these guys play that now you're seeing them they're so far past the get used to each other or learn about each other phase, and they're just that we've been doing this forever. Let's try something new just to see if it works. So,
I love that.
Yeah. Well, I'm intrigued by this matchup and how the Knicks play, and if the Wizards look like they have the last 9 games, then hopefully it's stress free. If it's the last preseason game repeat, then this should be a good matchup. Regardless, thank you, Matt, for coming on today's pod and helping me preview. Before you get out of here, please tell all the fine folks at home where they can find you.
If you're ever interested in Wizards coverage, it's the Bleav In Wizards Podcast, BLEAV, on the Bleav Podcast Network. It's myself and former Wizard Jahadi White once a week, sometimes twice a week, depending on schedules and things like that. So he tries to provide a player perspective on what we're seeing on the court, why, how. So I think that's got some relevancy for fans of any team. And then you can find us at Bleav In Wizards on Twitter and Instagram and all that kind of good stuff too.
Last question. What's that like doing a show with a former Wizard that gives that kind of perspective?
I did it with former Wizard and former Knick, Larry Hughes, before that.
Hey, Larry Hughes. Yes.
Yeah. Short-lived former Knick, but both great guys. Been a nice experience to do with them. Jahadi is like absolutely the nicest man possible. So it's really cool to do that with him. And I think we see the game a little bit differently sometimes. So that leads to some good convos about, hey, why is what I'm seeing as a fan different than what you would see as somebody who lived it? And it's been cool just to kind of learn from him. So
just one more follow up on that. Sure. Is he able to? Again, this is admittedly from someone who hasn't listened to enough of the show to know the rhythm of it, but. Sure. Is he able to see the modern game for how it plays, or is he more coming from his perspective of how it's changed since it was when he played?
It's a little bit of both, right? Like I think he gets where it's going. He's an AAU coach now in the Brad Beal elite program, and his kids are, one of them was on the under 17 Team USA. Like they're good players, so I think he gets it. But it's also, he's an old school back to the basket center, kind of physical. So I think he misses that style play, and honestly. I miss that style play. I would think a lot of older school Knicks fans miss being able to beat up on people in the trenches. So there's some of that for sure. But I think he gets, you've got to play a modern style of basketball. So it's kind of a nice blend.
As much as I miss that style, I have Julius Randle and a coach that loves rim protection on my team. So I get whatever version of that it converts to today. It's kind of still on my team. The Bleav In Wizards podcast, wherever podcasts are available, check it out when you can. Knicks fans, we like to give the KFS bump when guests come here. Matt, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, this was great. Would love to have you on, and maybe we can do something home and home next time the two teams play. I appreciate you having me, and good luck to you guys. Selfishly, I hope you win this game too, so it'd be great.
So it's funny. I've been saying at the end of these things, good luck in every game except this one, and I think it actually works out that we're both rooting for the same team.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it.